Hi, and welcome back to Takeaway Tuesday. Our last two episodes have focused on understanding children's memory capacities and how these can inform our forensic interview decision making. So we discussed that very helpful Danby article, which identified those three types of declarative memory. So episodic, which are those specific experienced events; semantic, which was that accumulated general knowledge; and a second type of semantic information, which is that accumulated knowledge of those personally experienced events. This is the script memory. Article also emphasized the importance of not memory hopping during forensic interviews. In other words, not asking an episodically focused question, then asking a semantically focused question and going back and forth. Danby made the point that this adds to the cognitive strain for children and can also lead to memory errors. So today we're going to take a closer look at the last point that Danby makes in her article, and that is that children who have experienced multiple incidents of abuse or witness, they need extra support from us. I find these cases to be probably the most challenging for a forensic interviewer. Those children come to us and they have a great deal of script memories. They have episodic memories that we are tasked with trying to get to. So there are some things that I am going to suggest for you all to think about incorporating into your practice in order to better support children in these type of cases. So the very first thing I want to stress is the narrative practice. So narrative practice, that's going to give you a snapshot of how this child's memory capacities operate. Going to ask them to think of something so you see how they retrieve a memory, how they organize it, how they articulate it. It gives you a very good, again, window into this child's capacities and great information going forward. Also, narrative practice teaches a child the level of detail that's going to be needed for the forensic interview. I think if you skip narrative practice, you're potentially limiting your capacity to support these children's memory recall. So please try not to skip it. Going on from narrative practice, think about beginning the transition with a what prompt. These prompts have been found by both field and experimental research to be superior in terms of helping children talk about their experiences and move to focusing on these experiences sooner. During the transition, listen for those linguistic markers of script. This is going to be that present perfect verb tense. Things keep happening to me, my mom does stuff, as well as some of those modifiers like always, usually, sometimes. If you hear these, when the child is giving you the response to that transition prompt, most likely you're talking to a child who's experienced multiple events, and that first stop in their memory retrieval is their script memory. So research has demonstrated that there are benefits when we're interviewing children in these types of cases to allow children to expand on their script responses before you make that switch over to those specific episodes. So think about expanding the script. The other thing that this initial script focus has been found to is it helps kids be more informative, and it may really prompt the recall of a unique episodic linked event or detail. So let's take a look at a transition response, and I'm going to explain 3 strategies for expanding the script. Okay, so think about a child saying, after you've asked, "What are you here to talk about?" "My neighbor." Say some more about your neighbor. Well, my neighbor's been doing nasty stuff for a long time. Sometimes he has me come over to play video games. When we're playing, he grabs me and makes me do things to his private. So hopefully you noticed those script references there. We're playing, he grabs me. So some things that you can think about doing: pose an action-focused script prompt. For example, you could say some more about your neighbor grabbing you, or talk about what happens when your neighbor does nasty stuff. To provide these script prompts, be mindful to incorporate the child's language, including the specific verbs as a helpful way to direct them to describe actions. An action-focused script prompt. Make sure when you're asking these questions that you are wording those questions in present perfect. Talk about what happens. I found that this is a very helpful strategy if you're talking to less narrative kids. So if you are talking to a more narrative child, and again, hopefully you've gotten a good insight into that when the child did a narrative practice, you can ask about the maltreatment starting. So for example, talk about the nasty stuff starting. I have found that this question can be very helpful in helping kids articulate experiences of grooming, manipulation, in addition to providing key details about the things that they've experienced. Again, this approach, I think, works well with highly narrative children. So a third strategy that I want to talk about is posing a direct location-focused question. For example, tell me all the places where the nasty stuff happens. I think these are great questions and can be used for both high and less narrative children. So after directing the child to expand the script, reflect on their responses. Did you have some specific episodic cues? Any one-time references? Did the child give you some unique labels? Did they talk about varied locations or descriptions of evolving interactions? If you have this information, that is what you can then incorporate into your episodic focused questions. So for example, in thinking back to our child, if the child said, one time he did it in the garage, that gives you a good opportunity to come back and repeat. You said one time he did it in the garage. Talk about all the things that happened the time he did it in the garage. If you've asked about the abuse starting and the child described an escalation, for example, you said the nasty stuff started when you played Roblox, but he did more things when you started playing Grand Theft Auto. You could say, talk about what happened one time when you played Grand Theft Auto. I think it's very effective when we get to this part of the forensic interview to think about reminding the child of their narrative practice. So in other words, the language that you used in narrative practice, think about one time you got to have something fun and told me everything that happened, or think about all the things that happened on your last birthday. You want to, again, remind the child that they had done that previously, and I find it effective to even tell children, right now I'm going to ask you to talk the same way you talked to me about the time you went to Carowinds, for example. Focus on one episode at a time. Here we want to be exhausting the narrative. Be very intentional on getting that beginning, that middle, and end of that sequence, of that event. And also, one more thing, be intentional in clearly articulating your shift to an episodic focus. Remember, for episodic focus, what you're actually doing is asking the child to shift to a more cognitively demanding memory retrieval process. Don't topic hop. We talked a lot about that our last two Takeaway Tuesday sessions. Make sure that you phrase your questions in past tense. Monitor for script shift. That is, if the child is talking, they're going along, and they're consistently using past tense language, and you get the idea that they are sustaining their focus on one event, but some scripted language slips in. They talk about things that would happen or things that my neighbor would do. You can check and just say, I want to make sure that we're still talking, for example, about the time in the garage. Please see the info print for more strategies for expanding the script and exhausting the episodic narrative. And tune in for the next Takeaway Tuesday when Andra Chamberlain will be back, and we're going to talk about essential elements for an effective narrative practice. Thank you so much, and thank you for all you do for the children in your community.